Bear Essentials podcast gives older bears a place to gather for real talk regarding topics and issues that they can relate to. Here at the Bear Essentials, we aren't just having conversations. We are looking to provide actionable intelligence through real-life experience and expertise of our guests. Our mission is to build a strong community that elevates and motivates people to go beyond their limiting beliefs by helping them realize that getting older is not an excuse to hibernate on their goals, but a reason to work harder.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Charles Wallace. Today's guest made a career in the National Hockey League as an enforcer. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, his job was to basically go out every game and look for a fight. Today, he joins the show to talk about the damage that did to him, not just physically, but mentally. We talk about his current mindset and how he was able to overcome that damage and is now using that experience to help others. So please, without further ado, let's jump into my interview with former Philadelphia Flyer, Riley Cote. But first, a word from our sponsor. Looking for a trusted and experienced information security company? Look no further than Wolfinger Consulting. Their team of experts has decades of experience providing reliable and thorough services in cybersecurity, digital forensics, and electronic discovery. At Wolfinger Consulting, they pride themselves on delivering high-quality and comprehensive projects that are tailored to meet the unique needs of each client. Whether you're dealing with a hacking issue, a complex business dispute, or a serious criminal investigation, Wolfinger Consulting has the expertise you need to reach a favorable outcome. It's too important to wait. Contact them today at wolfingerforensics.com and let them help you get the results you need. Hey, Riley, how you doing? Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, doing well, thanks. Appreciate you having me.
No, I'm excited to have you, Riley. Obviously, I'll let you introduce yourself, but for people that don't know, former NHL player for my hometown team, the Philadelphia Flyers. And, watching you through your career, always a fan of that part of you, but maybe even a bigger fan watching and seeing the journey that you went on and what some of the things we'll talk about today. So I'll let you, if you could, introduce yourself a little bit deeper to the audience, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Riley Cote, originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I've been living in the U.S. for 20 years now, and formerly a professional hockey player, more specifically a professional hockey fighter, and spent most of my time in the penalty box. And the hard-fought journey landed up squeezing me out at the age of 28. 2010, I retired and kind of embarked on this quest of holism and healing, and big proponent in mindfulness meditation as well as psychedelic integration. So it's kind of been the crux of the journey, and just been an amazing ride, honestly. Been able to kind of deal with my own demons, work through my own shit, and then I'm in a position now I'm helping others. So just grateful for the whole ride, the whole experience.
Yeah, and that's what really excited me to have you on, because I think, especially in general, but I think men more, I think it's harder for them to talk about things sometimes. And I think having somebody like you who you were as a player, as a fighter, and that you're coming out now and talking about some of these things, I think it will help others that, may be a little more nervous to talk about it. Riley, for the hockey part of your career, did you always, was being in the NHL always like the goal for you, or did that just kind of happen as your career progressed?
It was always the goal, as long as I can remember. Just being a child growing up in the middle of Canada, playing in the NHL was my dream. We had season tickets to the Winnipeg Jets, seen a lot of hockey, was exposed to it at a young age, and it was just something that seemed to be ingrained in my DNA. I just loved playing hockey, street hockey, pond hockey. So you always had these grand visions of playing in the NHL and scoring 50, 60 goals. Obviously university's got a little different path for you generally, but yeah, as long as I can remember, it was well, at the time thinking it was my purpose, it was my dream. So it was something I worked towards and felt like I was unstoppable. I was going to find my way there in some way, shape or form. And just say unfortunately, fortunately, I landed up, doing it the old-fashioned way and realizing that I had to do something a little bit different than I, had envisioned. I wasn't drafted. Looking at the guys getting called up, a lot of goals, lots of penalty minutes. So I, chose the toughest path, I think. And again, it was intentional. It was for me to give myself the best chance to live out my childhood dream, and obviously wasn't the safest play, but nonetheless, it was the play I chose, and it worked itself out. So I'm happy for it all.
So Riley, as you're playing now, I can only imagine as you're younger, right? And you have this dream. My guess is that there's a point during that when you're younger, probably you are at least as good or better than a lot of other guys. When does it kind of click to you that, you know what, as I go up in levels, I may have to go down this other path? Maybe not the path you envisioned, but it's the path I'm going to have to do.
Yeah, so I had my first real wake-up call at the age of 16 when I moved away from home and played in the Western Hockey League, the major junior in Canada. And I was drafted as a 16-year-old in the second round, still in my mind thinking I'm some skilled hockey player. Again, I was a big fish in a small pond growing up in Winnipeg. My age group, I was one of the better kids. And then I was quickly humbled when I, moved away from home and now playing against 16 to 20-year-olds from all Western Canada. Guys are bigger and stronger, grown men really, and highly skilled hockey players. So it was there that I had my first taste of like, holy, like, I better get my shit together and better get better quickly. But I was also exposed to fighting for the first time, in the junior levels, in the Western Hockey League, and realized that there was actually different roles, and understanding that, my first year at 16 years old, I would never consider myself an enforcer by any means, but I had gotten into, 10 or 11 fights that year, which was the most out of my complete junior hockey career. Fighting out of desperation, fighting out of necessity to kind of earn my stripes, but not identifying with it as a fighter. I wasn't like that, wasn't accepting of that role yet. The next year I'd take on a bigger role. In the year 3 and 4, more, offensive roles, power play time, the whole bit. Never in those 4 years did I accept the role of the fighter. I've been in, each year probably 4 or 5 fights, just spontaneous fights, sticking up for my teammates, but not of embracing the fighter role. So, it was probably my demise in the sense of not being drafted. I didn't really establish myself in any which way. I was kind of just a vanilla player, power forward, decent numbers, but not great numbers. Wasn't a force on the ice as far as an established fighter, like I mentioned. So that was really the catalyst of all these things kind of coming together, that I, decided to take on this role, turning pro at 20, being the enforcer, like going into training camps as the fighter, as a tough guy, and just like really focusing on that, and being very precise on my focused intention of what I was trying to do and how I was trying to be perceived. So that's kind of when I chose to do that and accepted that role, was when I turned pro at 20. Going to Toronto Maple Leafs training camp was really the start of that new identity as a hockey player.
So Riley, as you now are pro, what's that moment now as you kind of in your mind, this is the role, I'm going to be the fighter now. What's that moment as a pro where not just your mind, you are the fighter now, but you start to get recognized as the fighter amongst your teammates, amongst your coaches? And when's that happen? And do you remember specifically who maybe that happened against?
Yeah, well, it happened the off season before I went to Toronto Maple Leafs training camp, and I could have gone back to junior for one more year, called it overage year, or I could have transitioned and turned pro. Obviously there was a lot of variables up for grabs there, as if any team wanted to sign me, first of all, and then how that shook out was kind of to be determined. But that off season, I trained, or in my mind, I thought I was training to be a fighter. I was lifting a lot of weights. I kind of hit the bullseye in the wrong, on the wrong target as far as like, being a functional fighter. But, my mindset was there. It was like, I'm going into camp and I'm fighting the biggest guy and the guy with the most penalty minutes. I'm going as the fighter. I was a competitive guy. I was, accepting of the challenge. Again, those fights that I was talking about in junior hockey, I did pretty well. And so I knew in my mind, like, I could do this. Didn't know how I was going to do it besides just showing up and learning, the old fashioned way, get my ass beat a few times. But, I went into Toronto Maple Leafs training camp with this attitude, this chip on my shoulder. My first shift in training camp in the blue and white scrimmage, I jumped over the boards and had a perfectly lined hit against Travis Green, who I ran over and folded in half. And then next thing you know, Darcy Tucker is challenging me, acting all cocky, slicking his hair back, and I land up two punching him. And Darcy Tucker is a tough guy, but like he's not that big of a guy. And realistically, I'm not that big of a guy either. But like my attitude was bigger than like a featherweight or lightweight. Like I was going in there to be heavyweight, undersized heavyweight. So it was a win. I got some energy out of it, but like there was still much bigger guys to tackle. But that was kind of the beginning of me establishing myself as that presence. So I landed up signing with the St. John's Maple Leafs and spent 90% of that year in the Central Hockey League, where there was no shortage of experience down there. You got all these meatheads, all these juice monkeys, ripping around wanting to fight. So there was no shortage of fights down there. I think I fought like 35 times that year. Again, going after the biggest guy and the guys with the most penalty minutes. Learning the hard way. Again, I hadn't had any formal fight training. It was like learning in combat, learning in the moment. Lifting a lot of weights. Again, just kind of more of this meathead mentality versus more of this martial artist mentality. So, but that being said, it served its purpose. You get noticed, right? You get some street credibility. People know who you are. As far as like kind of tiptoeing around, sometimes because they don't know what to expect and a little bit unpredictable. And then, that I established myself that year, as like that was, who I was and who I was, becoming as far as that role. And that was what scouts and organizations expected out of me. That was, moving forward when they reached out to show interest in signing contracts. It was Riley as the enforcer. It wasn't like Riley as the third line grinder, that's penalty killer or whatever else. Like that was what was expected, and that was what I was bringing. That was what I was focusing on. I almost forgot to play hockey. It was so embodied in the role. It just consumes you. It's like it's hard to explain. It's fight or flight, and you're kind of in this chronic state of anxiety where all you're focused on is fighting. That would be my one regret. Is like maybe looking back and saying maybe I should have focused on hockey a little bit more. But that being said, I was a gamer, and organizations I played in knew exactly what they were getting out of me. They knew exactly my energy, my attitude, my mindset going out there, that I wasn't going to be screwed with. My teammate wasn't going to be screwed with without me stepping in there. So, naturally you kind of create, a niche, if you will. And, again, predictability. Coaches and organizations want consistency. They want to know exactly what they're going to get out of their players. And, they just knew with me that that's what they were going to get, So learned the hard way, worked my way up from Central Hockey League, East Coast Hockey League, through the American Hockey League, and eventually found my way, just grinding it out. And eventually, got into more formal fight training, which was super helpful because you're fighting, bigger, stronger guys at every level you move up. But, just kind of starting from the most raw foundational, point of just getting your hands dirty, getting punched in the face, and learning what works, what doesn't work. And you're getting the experience. There's no other way to get experience than by actually doing it. So that's kind of how I did it.
You touched on something there that I definitely want to get into. A great segue by you was that I look, I'm 51 now, so I think the way I look at this now is a lot different than probably the way I would have looked at this 10 years ago if I spoke to you, right? And one of the things in my mind that I wanted to talk to you and ask you about was that part you mentioned a little bit, was that anxiety, and how did that play on your mind of always knowing that your job basically was I'm going out there every night and I'm looking for a fight. How does that like weigh on you on and off the ice?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this is kind of like the centerpiece of my demise, right? It's like this chronic state of anxiety. The first couple of years, maybe 2, 3 years, even up until I probably made the NHL, I was accepting of it because it was like it was part of the mission to live out my childhood dream. I was accepting of it. However, it was emotionally and spiritually taxing, as you can imagine. It's like it's not a normal mindset to be in, and having been around the veteran community and have a lot of friends that have served, the closest thing I can describe it to is something that they've experienced, where it's like, you're essentially going to war, in my version of that, in my, small little world, and obviously not as crazy of a bubble, but nonetheless, the risk is still there. You could get your face pounded in any night. You could break your face, concussion. There's a lot of risk there, and you're fighting guys, that are big humans that can pack a punch. So, constantly having on your mind, you never fully settle. Your nervous system, you never fully calms, and you're never able to fully settle in and find peace, right? Because you're always worrying about the next fight, always looking over your shoulder and seeing who's coming. Again, like it's a little bit of a cutthroat business too. In hockey, you don't know when the fight's going to start. Boxing, UFC, the bell rings 9 p.m. The cage closes. The fight begins. In a hockey game, the puck drops. Like, you could mentally prepare to fight first shift, but it doesn't always work out that way. So there's always, even if the fight happened first shift, I'd be worrying about the next fight, looking over my shoulder. So I always say, like, the hardest part about the job was the emotional toll it took. The physical part was almost easy, because once you're engaged in the fight, you're just like, it's just you and the other guy. Not a whole lot of thinking. You're in it. You get punched in the face. You really don't feel it until the next morning, when everything kind of settles. So, but the emotional piece there was the hardest part. I think that's, looking back, that was kind of the piece that I couldn't skirt tail. There's no way escaping that, and you had to deal with it. You had to face it every single day. Even games I prepared to fight, I didn't fight. There was that dark cloud of anxiety of, like, this is what you need to do. This is how you're going to do it. All these mind games. That was it. I look back and try to make connections of some of my behavioral patterns, substance abuse issues and stuff. It was self-medicating. It was trying to push away the anxiety. It was trying to hide from it. It was making it go away for a little bit, so I didn't have to feel it. And obviously, like, the way I was living on and off the ice wasn't sustainable. It's like the physical body's going to give, the mind's going to give, because it's not in alignment. It's not a normal mindset to be in. Long periods of time. Season after season after season. And I give a ton of credit to the guys that did it a lot longer than I did, and I don't know how they did it. And how they were able to even preserve their mental health a little bit. But saying that, I've seen a lot of guys struggle, a lot of mental health issues and substance abuse issues, and you can't fully tie it back to the role of the enforcer, because I've seen a lot of skill guys, dealing with the same stuff. But it's a role within a role within a role. It's a game within a game, and it's a very unique, interesting job that you are the called upon, enforcer, protector, whatever word you want to throw on it, and you're expected to do that. So even on days, guys in the real world take days off, like, mentally. It's like, oh, I'm just going to check out today. You can't check out, because it's like you're gonna get your ass beat, first of all, but you're gonna let your whole team and teammates down, and there was no room for that. So you had to at least pretend you were on, or you had to, again, playing the role. The nights that I really didn't want to engage, like, I'm still playing the role, still puffing my chest out and flexing, knowing that I still potentially could get in a fight, but deep down knowing that I really didn't want to fight. So yeah, to answer your question in a nutshell, it's just like it wore on me. It wore on me to the point where that was kind of like the exact thing that pushed me out of the game. I just couldn't live like that any longer.
Hi, everyone. As some of you may or may not know, NGBN is a network that is made up of many, many amazing creators and hosts who have some incredible shows. I'd like to introduce you to one of them right now, my friend Chris Rubio. Chris, how's it going?
Charles Wallace, what is up, my man?
Chris, could you tell my audience a little bit about your show, The Rubio Method?
The Rubio Method is a funny and lighthearted show where it's just me interviewing some guys. We're having a good time, just trying to see what it's like to be a 40s, 50s, even 60-year-old man just trying to survive in life and have a good time while doing it.
Thanks. Appreciate you stopping by, Chris. And to my audience, please do yourself a favor and be sure to check out The Rubio Method on ngbn.tv. Yeah, you mentioned something there too that I wanted to ask a little bit was I remember from when you would play with the Flyers, and I remember I was one of the games I was at. It was, and looking back now, interesting, and hearing you talk about like the dynamic when you would come on the ice, you could almost feel the buzz of anticipation in the building that a fight was going to happen potentially. You know, I think as fans, at least in our minds, I don't really think the result mattered as much, but I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about letting your teammates down. I mean, let's be honest, right? As men, we know if we won or lost, at least we think we know if we won or lost. How did that feel for you if you kind of felt you may have lost the fight? And could you tell visibly if that actually brought the team down, the energy down?
You know what? I don't think so. They always say like, 90% of it is just showing up, right? And, 'cause it takes a lot of balls to fight. It doesn't matter who you're fighting, especially when you're fighting like the toughest guys in the league. So, personally, yeah, I mean, there's an ego blow to losing. Exactly what you said. Like, when you lost the fight. I think earlier in my career, I wasn't fazed by it. It was just like get up and go after the guy again. Like I don't care. It's like you knock me down, I'll get back up. Like there was obviously a pride associated with it. I think what happened for me is like I finally make myself an established NHL player and fighter. After that first year, I fought all the tough guys. And I did pretty well. I definitely had some losses, but I did pretty damn well against guys way out of my weight class, fighting guys I shouldn't be fighting in the first place, and got some legitimate street cred, in the hockey world fighting. And then it was season 2. It's like, okay, we got to do this all over again, right? And then I think season 2, was still pretty good, but I could see myself like being more affected by it, by the losses in a sense, where I dwelled on them a little bit more. The shelf life of me thinking about them was a little bit longer, which is not a good, just not a good thing when you got to put a period on it and move on to the next one, because it's not like boxing, UFC. You have 3 months in between your fights. You know what I mean? Like you literally could be fighting 2-3 times a game, so you really have to have a short memory with that stuff. But I think it was like, again, it's like an ego thing. I think maybe it's like my third year when I really started to kind of dwell on my, losses and being like, am I like letting my team down? Am I like not being as good as I could be? I never thought that before. I never like, lost the fight. You still get, butt tapped, pat on the shin pads, like, way to show up and fight the biggest guy in the league. It's like, so what, you got your ass beat, you showed up and you took it like a man, so, but then I think, again, it was like part of like, am I still doing this? Why am I still doing this? Like, can I like take a breath here and not have to fight every night? So I was kind of like in this battle of like still feeling the need to, generate street credit by, not turning down fights and still being that relentless, fearless guy that everyone expected. But then also like, but also feel like I've done enough, like where I can actually, avoid some of these fights and play a little hockey. And I always got stuck in this thing, but I always felt drawn back to the fight because that's what everyone expected out of me, to the point where, again, like timely fights where I should have turned them down, not turning them down and fighting and then maybe losing them and then being like, well, why did I even fight in the first place? And then I got my ass beat. It's almost like karma, flexing itself. There's this battle of this ego and like alignment thing, and then Donald Brashear, who I had some really good fights with him. Actually, one of my first fights in preseason, my first year, I ended up doing really well with him. Cut him, had a pretty good fight against arguably the top 2 toughest guys in the league. But he beat my ass in Philly one night, pretty good. Fought him again the second time in the game. In the first fight, he ended up cracking my sinus. gave it to me pretty good. The second fight was a little bit of a draw. We kind of rolled over, but it was after that fight where I was like, holy shit, man. Like, I'm really questioning what I'm doing. Like, I didn't recover like I did as a young guy trying to work my way up in the league. It was almost like kind of dwelling on these emotions that I've been having around like, what the hell am I even doing here? Like, it's like proven myself. I could play in the NHL. I've, found my way, like the hardest possible road you could ever go down. But then I'm just like finding myself in these same situations, and I'm letting myself down. If I'm letting myself down, like I've got to be letting my teammate down. Then you're telling yourself all these stories. So I don't think ever, do you ever let the team lets you down when you actually show up? I don't think they ever like, oh, Riley, like, it's like you let me down because you're doing something they wouldn't do anyways, and but like I think when you start second guessing yourself as a fighter and having doubt, it's not a good position to be in. So I think that was probably my demise too, but I think it was part of the process. It was kind of deconstructing this false identity, this ego, this person that wasn't really me. And then accepting that, like, it's okay to actually want to get out of this, and try and find some version of alignment, right? Because it's not normal. I knew it wasn't going to last forever. I don't know how long I could carry on this act of this role. But the universe has an interesting way of kind of pushing you where you need to be. Anxiety and all these pressures and stressors generally push you. They push you in or they push you out. And I was starting to listen to my body. I was starting to listen to the voices. I guess the spirit within that was, basically telling me to like you need to reflect on what you're doing, and you need to be honest with yourself, because what you're doing isn't sustainable, and your mindset now isn't the way it was before. Now it's like, you're going into a fight, worrying about losing. Like that's the worst, mindset you could have going into a fight. That's why all boxers, all UFC fighters, if you talk to them before they fight, they're winning the fight every time. There's no doubt. Even if they lose, there's no doubt going into it. So once you have doubt and you have like these questions, it's kind of, I would say it's almost over for you. And I recognize that. I was honest with myself, and then I have to do some, real kind of, looking inwards and just digging deep within and kind of figuring out what this looks moving forward. So.
Yeah, Riley, I want to say this to you though. I think honestly, and again, me being older than you, I'd say to you this. I think your journey and how you come about, especially what you're doing now, I really think it took a lot of maturity, because I think you were for me, it was really young that as you talk about these thoughts. I don't know a lot of guys at that age, man, that are able to kind of think through it in the mature way that you did. At least, and I know when I was reading about you and reading some of the things, I was like, you know what? I don't know. I think this guy should get a hell of a lot of credit, because I don't know a lot of guys in their mid to late 20s that are kind of able to maybe accept their own truth and move on. So I wanted to give you a lot of credit for that. So when do you finally realize though, and as I want to move into what you're kind of doing now, when do you realize that not just some of the thoughts, right? When do you realize even physically, mentally, like how you're like, you know what? This had a really negative impact on me, and I need to do something about it.
Yeah. What was my last? It was my last year, 2009, 2010. John Stevens was the head coach at the time, and he was my number one fan. Between him and Paul Holmgren, my number one fans. Had Johnny in the minor leagues. He loved what I brought, but he could see, the performance drop. He could see there was something going on. I wasn't playing a whole lot. He lands up getting fired. Peter Laviolette comes in. He has no use for me, right? And he won a Stanley Cup in Carolina with no tough guy. So it was like, you're going to be that 13th forward, and I'm going to be honest with you, you're going to work your ass off, and you're going to keep being a team guy like you are. And I was accepting of it. I could see the writing on the wall where it was going. I only dressed, I think, 15 games that year, and I dressed every warm-up, the whole season, all playoffs, all the way through the finals against Chicago. Dressed every warm-up, was team guy. I was actually put on waivers one time that year, but was never sent down. It was all because I just kept a good attitude and kept working hard. But that whole year, there was a lot of soul searching. There was a lot of questions. There was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of trying to figure this shit out. I actually leaned up pretty good that year. I lost like 12 pounds to the point where like they're like, are you able to even fight heavyweights anymore? You know, because I was like, well, Labby was all about, you know, we're gonna be lean hockey players, right? And it's like I'm like looking at myself, well, I'm like fat, you know, being this elite athlete, you know, packing on weight to be, you know, a tough guy. And you know, a lot of self-reflection, like a lot of just like, what the hell is going on, and riding it out. I'm still grateful. I'm in the NHL making, you know, more money than I ever made, but also I don't feel fulfilled. There's no spiritual fulfillment in what I'm doing. So that whole year was a major teaching lesson for me. You know, it was really kind of focusing on my thoughts, right? I'm like, what am I thinking? What am I projecting? And what am I creating for my future? So there was a lot of like, you know, I really don't think I'm going to be doing this much longer, putting it out to the ether, the universe, whatever you want to call it. A lot of asking for help, you know, you can call it the Great Spirit, God, you know, it's like just kind of like, you know, asking for some sort of sign, like, you know, some sort of, just something to kind of hang my hat on. But again, the whole season, great attitude, and hardest worker I could be. We lose to Chicago. I had another year of my contract, one-way contract with the Flyers. Have 2 surgeries at the end of the year, and part of like this past season was like listening to intuition, right? It was like tapping into what I thought was truthful. And you know, had a relationship with cannabis, and I actually used cannabis the last 2 surgeries because I was again dealing with some substance abuse issues. Alcohol and pills mainly as being the ones that were really affecting my thinking and my spirit. So I told myself I could use cannabis as a pain management tool versus an opioid, which was highly successful, and I proved to myself, holy shit, like, you know, like there's some power here because you actually listened to what, you know, your experience was with these plants and you applied it to medicine without really even knowing like any of the science to support it besides just some surface level stuff that I'd read. You know, gave me the contact, you know, some power in like dealing with some of the issues I was dealing with. I actually stopped drinking, but what happened, the biggest piece what happened was like my year-end meetings with Paul Holmgren were like, listen, like I don't feel great, you know, physically, mentally, you know, some concussion related issues, substance abuse issues, there's all this stuff, stress, pressure, you know, all these stories that I was telling myself. But at least I laid out my heart to him and put it out there, like let him know how I was feeling. I go back home in the off season, and 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from Paul Holmgren and says, "Listen, there's a job opening with the Phantoms. You know, one of the assistant coaches is not coming back this year, and I thought of you. You know, knowing how you're feeling, we could transition that last year of your contract into a coaching deal, and you know, work, and then just kind of, you know, you retire, get your salary off the cap." And like immediately in that moment, I was like, this is it. You know, I am totally good with what you're proposing here. I told him I'd sleep on it and let him know the next day. But in that moment, I knew that was it. It was an opportunity to transition, stay in the game, but also to be on the other side of the fence where I'm no longer waking up every morning preparing to fight. You know, it was like a completely different mindset. Yeah, I realized I was also forfeiting my ability to be a professional athlete and pursuing that, you know, wherever that could land up. But in my heart, I knew that was the move. It was a way of transitioning with some sort of, you know, cushion, I guess you could say, but like not really. It was like it was for me to escape the daily grind of preparing to fight, and it was immediate. As an immediate weight off my shoulders. It was like I could breathe. I could kind of just like almost relax a little bit, knowing that I wasn't, you know, preparing to fight anymore. So it was wild how it worked out. But like, you know, my childhood dream was to play in the NHL. And in that moment, one conversation, it's like accepting and letting go of everything I had worked for since I was 4 years old. You know what I mean? It's like, and accepting that this is what I needed to do. Not because I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be an assistant coach in the minor leagues, and like that was like a passion of mine. It was like, no, it was like you have an opportunity to kind of exit stage left, bow out of the game with honor. You know, the Flyers were loyal to me. I'm being loyal to them. You know, I'm getting my salary off the cap. You know, they could find a much better player than myself. My mind wasn't in it. But also the biggest piece was like, I get an opportunity to now heal. and find myself and like embark on this quest that wasn't misaligned. And now I could actually find alignment, and that's, it was the best thing I ever did, for mental, emotional, and spiritual health, because, from the outside in, you're living the life, and you're living, your childhood dream. But when there's no fulfillment there, and again, I wasn't a 50 goal scorer making $10 million a year, yes, I was making more money than I ever made, but like, there's always like the trade-off of like, is it worth it? Is it worth it at the end of the day? And, I see so many guys go by the wayside in darkness, through substance abuse and mental health issues, suicide. How many guys is the game taken out? Alcohol taken out, pills taken out. I didn't want to be that guy. I was just like, I didn't want to be another stat, and I wanted to not just heal, but I just felt that I could, rise above and, hopefully be an impact in the world of mental health, spiritual health, mindfulness, and the whole bit. So it was a progression, and it's a never-ending journey, right? We're always working on ourselves and improving ourselves. But some of the things early on in my retirement were foundational for where I am today, and will always be part of the formula. So I'm just beyond grateful that it played out the way it has, and that I took that leap of faith too, right? I mean, a lot of people 28 years old wouldn't give up a $600,000 salary to coach in Adirondack, New York. It's not exactly part of like most people's visions, but I knew in my heart and my soul that I needed to do it to kind of escape the party, escape the the limelight, escape all these like egocentric things that played into being the man, right? You're the fighter, you're the guy. And I was just like, it was just too much pressure, too much stress that I didn't really want anymore. It wasn't alignment, it wasn't nurturing the spirit within. So just a lot of lessons in a short amount of time, and I'm just grateful for them all, because they're foundational to who I've kind of become, and just helped me allow to let go of who I thought I was, right? There's a huge letting go of this false identity that you create for yourself. Not just a hockey player, but a hockey fighter is like even more specific, right? I mean, I grew up a hockey player, known as the hockey player, still known as that, I guess, but like it was, my pro career, playing the NHL, wasn't just a hockey player, I was a hockey fighter. So letting go of that real, egocentric masculine identity, and not just like letting it go, is like embracing, the feminine as well, like understanding that we all have both of these energies within us, right? You mentioned it, I think, at the start, is like this ultra, masculine, type of role, macho. Men have a hard time, talking about their feelings and being vulnerable, like, and learning that that's okay, and speaking about emotions is okay. And in fact, it's necessary. Expressing emotions is what the body needs to do. Otherwise, we're just compounding stress, trauma, and all these, these things on top of each other. The emotions just keep building, and then we become more rigid, more stressed, more depressed. So it's necessary. Speaking about this is a form of expression, right? Singing, movement, dance, like, all these things are forms of expression. But speaking certainly is one, and talking things through and being vulnerable and crying, it's allowed. It's like, it's necessary, right? I mean, but we've been trained. It's programming. It's not just in hockey culture. It's just traditional Western industrialized, colonialized culture, right? It's just like tough it out, and bury those emotions, bury those traumas. They don't need to be talked about. But I think things are transitioning. The world's more accepting of this. You've seen professional athletes, Olympic athletes, pulling off world stages because of their mental health. People are being more vulnerable, putting themselves in substance abuse programs and talking about it, and trying to share with their networks to help hopefully people in their community that are struggling with a similar thing. So it's things are moving. Things are, think about like traditional Broad Street bullies, 74, 75, like drinking beer, winning Stanley Cups, not even training to be hockey players. Then you go through this evolution of physical training, sports specific training. We've mastered training the physical body. But now it's that's up here. It's like we've never, we've never really fully trained the mind, and now it's like, there's a whole movement around mindfulness and meditation and breath, super fundamental, just being human. But then you talk about performance, like there's this whole world of mindfulness now being incorporated into the corporate sports organizations as well as corporate, business structures of like mental health is everything. If you don't have that, doesn't matter how good of a performer you are if you can't perform because you're mentally unwell. So, I mean, now I'm just excited that, well, unfortunately, there's a huge market for this because we're mentally unwell. Like to me, the mental health crisis is beyond mental wellness. It's like emotional and spiritual wellness, right? I mean, it's really getting in tune with our emotions and our spiritual bodies. So, we're in a crisis, and I'm just feel like I'm in a great position to lend a voice and help where I can and impact, different pockets of my network and communities that I can, and, share my story and be vulnerable, and, and hopefully it could be an impact for people in their struggles.
Yeah, Riley, I mean, I would dare to say this to you, man. I think that what you're embarking on and doing now, I mean, obviously being a hockey fighter and getting to touch people with your fists, I think you're going to be touching way more people with your message than you ever got to touch as a player with your fist. Because, I mean, and again, I mean this as a compliment, but like just looking at who you are and who you were, I think right there, that's a huge impact on people. Because when people, men especially, see someone like you who doesn't fit that typical mold of somebody who's willing to share their emotions and things like that, I think that's a big deal. So I want to end with this. I want to just give you a couple minutes to talk about, you have a lot of like cool stuff going on now as far as that journey and what you're doing. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks. I got a few different projects going on, and they're all some bit in alignment, and they're all around, physical, mental, and spiritual wellness. So, I teach yoga, meditation, and breath work, and that would be kind of like the integration piece to whatever other facet that I'm involved in, whether it's cannabis related activity, cannabinoid related activity, as an anxiety tool or pain management tool, sleep tool. But then in the world of like mental health and behavioral health in the psychedelic space, I do a lot of work in Jamaica with legal psilocybin mushrooms. But a big part of my job is the integration piece. So it is integrating the yoga, mindful movement, meditation, quieting the mind, and breath. Just connecting to breath, the spirit, and is a huge piece of it because we outsource everything, right? I think it's really my teaching is that, and it's not my teaching. It's fundamental to the teachers way before me and the sages and the gurus. It's like we are the medicine, right? We got to teach people to lean on their own spine and not feel like they need to outsource everything. So it's looking within and teaching that we have a lot more power than we think we have. Beginning with thought, tapping into breath and quieting the mind and how these equate to performance and a better life. So again, my personal role in all this is being a vehicle that represents the mindfulness and meditation, but it certainly intersects with my work in cannabis and my work with psychedelics. In my work with youth sports, outside of the plant medicines, because the messages lands up being the same. It's like we have the power. We all have these powers within, and let's start unlocking them. And it's a practice, right? We're teaching a practice because it's not like something you wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm enlightened, or I'm fully meditated. It's a practice. Like the physical practice is a practice, but also sitting in meditation is a practice, and doing these things on a daily basis. And then it's like bringing awareness to all behaviors in your life. It's like, oh, why am I reaching for that bag of chips? Oh, maybe it's stress eating, maybe, so then all of a sudden there's awareness around that. You could bring awareness to why, oh, I'm reaching for my phone again. Am I doing business, or am I just, grabbing because it's like a comfortable thing to do because my mind needs a distraction, and then all of a sudden it's like everything becomes mindfulness. And I think that's like the core of where I am with all this, whether I speak to a school. I'm going back home actually in 2 weeks and speaking to my old high school, haven't been back there in 20 years, and I'm talking, bringing me in to talk about mindfulness and wellness. Obviously not gonna be talking about psychedelics or cannabis, but at the core of it is all the same. And it's like, so no matter where I go, that is the vehicle. It's, I know the word yoga gets a little bit misunderstood and misinterpreted, but I'm teaching yoga. Yoga is beyond the poses. It's preparing the body for meditation. And we are in a mental health crisis. It's all about controlling our thoughts. So psychedelics, have an amazing impact on the brain, not just like the biology of the brain, but how the brain operates. We hear about the present moment a lot, right? Oh, the present moment. Well, that's where flow state exists, right? That's where, when you're an athlete, I didn't even recognize it when I was a professional athlete. Well, I was in flow state when I was actually playing hockey or fighting. I wasn't thinking, I was just doing, and I think we get into the thinking mind way too much, and then we don't live through the heart and that flow state where life exists. It's not in the past, it's not in the future, it's kind of right here. And yoga is teaching that, but meditation, mindfulness helps us bring us back to that point of power, is that moment. So that's my message, and that's what I'm teaching. And again, I'm doing a lot of work in different facets, but I am representing the spiritual nature, emotional nature of what a lot of these tools are trying to represent. And because you have to be doing the work, you can't rely on plants or medicine or all these things to do the work for you. But it begins with the thinking. And once you realize we have the power, I think it's limitless, right? But I think a lot of people get stuck, and I think that's part of my teaching too, is that once you start taking a couple of deep breaths and connecting, and grounding and centering, it's like there's a little more space there. You don't have to be so rigid. So yeah, yoga, plant medicine, still do some stuff in hockey, but even that, I'm bringing the mindfulness into the hockey stuff. It's like, I don't want to go and just teach hockey. It's like there's enough hockey coaches out there. I want to come in and bring mindfulness into hockey. We're looking after the youth. It's like the youth need this more than ever. It's like well, everybody needs it, but the yoga, the mindfulness is the spine of it all, teaching the power within.
Yeah, well, I'm excited for you, Riley, because I think what you're doing it's going to have a huge impact. Lastly, is there, website? I'll put in the show notes also, but website, anything you want to have people you want to shout out so people can go directly to?
Yeah, I have my own personal website. It's rileycote.com, and probably need to do a better job of keeping up with it. But just some recent articles, just kind of showing some of the work I've been doing. I'm on Instagram at rileycote32. I believe the same handle on Twitter, LinkedIn, same thing. I think for Instagram is social media. Unfortunately, is probably the best way to just kind of see what I'm doing. You can reach out to me there if people are interested in some of the stuff I'm doing. But I say it's progressive, it's ancient. It's like I'm not teaching anything new. It's like old as the earth, as far as plant medicines go, and old as the earth as long as humans have been around. Is talking about the mind and controlling the mind and tapping into breath. So happy to kind of be a steward of ancient practices. Really, it's not new. We just kind of abandon the foundationals of living and the laws of nature, really. So check it out and say hi.
It will. Riley, I hope everyone definitely checks you out. And I think, like I said, what you're doing is going to be extremely impactful. I think we need more of it. That's what I'm hoping to do with my own podcast here, is to get messages like this out to people with, people like you. So again, Riley, thank you for doing this today. Really appreciate it. And as always, I appreciate everybody tuning in to watch and listen. So thank you all. Take care. Bye.
Yeah.
This has been the Bare Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.